So I was thinking about how to bridge the gap uh, from isolation to connection. It's the same one, the same gap that we experience when we're talking about disconnection and intimacy. So there's a gap, and I'm going to talk about this book in a second. But I was thinking about in most relationships, I was talking to Dr. Frueh, and we are talking about how in most relationship the connection's already been made, right? So for instance, if and the idea is you want to reconnect if you've been disconnected. So think about it in business. If you're in business, maybe you own a company, or maybe you're doing maybe a transaction with somebody, or you have an opportunity to do another transaction in business with somebody. You most likely already connected, and then the next transaction is the opportunity to reconnect. So how do you reconnect in that environment, especially when you had something, maybe a conflict happen, right? Well, think about it in marriage. Marriage, we're always experiencing conflict. So how do we reconnect? How do we bridge that gap from isolation to connection? And how do we re-engage in those relationships? And I call it reconnection and intimacy. How do we get reconnected, and how do we form a new level of intimacy with those people that are important to us, right? And then socially, how about that social environment? Like for instance, right now you're watching on the podcast, you're watching maybe on YouTube, on Instagram. There's all kinds of different places that you can be watching you can be watching live from, right? That's just you just have that opportunity. So where are you watching this, and how do we get connected and stay connected in that area of social, and not only social media, but in socially, like social groups, clubs, organizations, all that, right? So what I did is I started to read this book. I was given this book by my friend, Dr. Stephen Frueh. And if you see, I have all kinds of notes and all kinds of stickies. And there was something that I got really excited about talking to him about. And it was this diagram here. And I'm going to walk you through the diagram. I'm going to show you the diagram, and then I'm going to bring on Dr. Frueh. So let me find this. I created a little video so we could see this diagram. It's really, really cool, so you can understand it. And it's called the caps. And we'll explain that to you in a minute. Dr. Frueh, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Is my mic unmuted?
Yeah, you sound good. You sound good. You
Okay.
sound unmuted.
Yeah, that's what I want. I intend to be. There's a guy named Andre Gide, a couple hundred years ago. He says, if you ask me what I came into the world to do, I will tell you. I came to live out loud.
I love it. I came
I
to
love
live
it.
out loud.
Yes.
So, Dr. Frueh, I was looking through your book. Ingrid and I both have been reading it, and I like this whole part about caps. And so we have a whole presentation to do. So do you want to kind of give us a quick overview of how you came up with it, and then we'll jump right into it and go through it.
Sure. You know, when I wrote the book, and I say we because my wife had veto power, she would say, I don't like that or how that works and so on. So she was very much a part of the book, but it was my book. I wrote it. Uh, I was saying all the time at that time, I consider most divorces abortions of a promise.
Mm.
That is, two people fall in love and they believe their love. You don't walk up to them and say, I bet you can't wait for the divorce. They say, wow, I love him so much. He listens to my story. He's not like my last husband, or he's not like my last wife, and so on. You know the drill.
Yeah.
It starts out good and pure and genuine. I'm not marrying her for her money. She's not marrying me for my money, whatever. So then what happens 5 to 7 years later when over 50% of them break down? Well, that's an aborted promise, is the way I was thinking about it and talking about it. And why is the promise aborted? Because of simple lack of competencies. It's not that the love has died like all the romance songs want you to believe. It's not that she was the Wicked Witch of the North. She might have been. It's not that he was the complete dope of the South. He might have been. But in the most cases, the marriage dies because of lack of competencies. So I say, what would be the most important competency when you run into various conflicts, as you surely are going to if you're partnering up with a man or a woman, even another man or another woman, whatever it is.
Mhm.
What's going to happen? Well, you're going to have conflict. What's going to happen when you have conflict? Well, you start distancing. If you don't have competencies, you start pulling back. You start getting distant, but you don't really think it's terminal. But then you start getting from distance, you go to analyzing or diagnosing your partner. From distance to diagnosis to analysis. Now, let me tell you what's wrong with Martine. Let me tell you what's wrong with Stephen. Let me tell you what's wrong with her or him or whatever. From there, you go into stonewalling. You go into stopping, relating
Yeah, we're
altogether.
going. It's going. We're going too far. So that's
Okay.
yeah. So I was wanting a real quick breakdown of it.
Oh,
So
okay.
thank you. So basically, the bottom line is you find somebody you fall in love with, and 5 years later, you're like
What am I doing?
you're playing games with each other.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
basically what we're talking about. And so the
Yes.
caps method is a way to identify like where you're at so that you can reconnect.
So if you want to stop the aborted process,
Okay.
you begin with curiosity.
I know I got it. I'm just talking about the caps in general. So
Yeah.
in general, the process is a process to gain connection.
Yes.
Okay. And then so then I looked at it for business. Like how does that also affect business? I looked at that and I was like, that's really good. So I saw that there were disconnections that I have in business. And then different agents that I talk to, different clients that I talk to, they're disconnected in their business. They're disconnected with their employees, their
Yes. Yes.
sometimes their leadership, sometimes their clients, often their clients, right? And
Yes.
so I was saying, how is this process? How can we apply this process to not only our personal, intimate relationships, our family relationships, but also our business relationships? Because that's what happens.
Yes.
Okay. So why
That
don't we
is.
jump in? Why don't we go ahead? What do you want to say about that?
Well, I was just going to say, if you do, as you do, a lot of talking with business people, as I do as well,
Mm-hmm.
we get a oft repeated story. They think it's the client's problem, not theirs. And they'll say, in this business climate, blah, blah, blah. Or this guy just doesn't get it, whatever. They tend to not take responsibility for themselves as a businessman and why their business isn't thriving. So the CAPS model is a wake up call to say, hey, how curious are you about this client or this spouse? How curious are you about what they're thinking, feeling, imagining, doing? How curious are you? Because,
Cool. Okay.
yeah,
Let's
yeah,
start from the beginning. So the first part, which I would imagine is like the breakdown, is happens in our assumptions.
yes,
And so I like that.
yes.
So assumptions are like where you're separate, like you're not connect. We're not connected. We're making
Well,
assumptions about
sure,
each other.
sure.
Yeah.
It's like a guy in my group who had a IT business 10 years ago. He said, it's a bad business climate, Stephen, and things just aren't selling and blah 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 blah. And I didn't even think about it. I just said it has nothing to do with the bad business climate. And he looked at me, and every man in the room looked at me. There's about 12 men in there. Every man looked at me and said, what are you talking about? You say the business climate isn't real? I said, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying business climates are business climates. But if you want to get traction, then you say it all has to do with me because I know people in businesses that are in businesses similar to somebody else. They're thriving and the other guy isn't. So that's a personal factor. So we look at caps that way. The assumptions that you bring are can be deadly.
Okay, that's good. That's a great distinction.
Yeah.
So assumptions, is where to start. You want to start with your
Yes.
assumptions. You like
Yes.
identify your assumptions, and what are you assuming? Where preconceived notions do you have? How are you entering into conversations, knowing like I know the way this person is, or I know the way this is going to turn out, like that. It's kind of like and the problem with that is because oftentimes we're right. I mean, we're often right. It's just when we're wrong where we need the CAPS method. Most people you're successful in business. So let's say you're right, 70, 80% of the time. It's that, 20, 30, 40% of the time that you're wrong, that you're not identifying that you're wrong. And then you don't have a system to work that out. How do I work out the fact or the challenge of being wrong? And I like this method because it gives us a place to go. Well, I'm making an assumption here. That's a powerful place. Okay, well, maybe I'm just assuming something. Is that how you look
Well,
at that?
yeah, you could say it's immaterial whether you're right, because what you really need is a traction of what's missing here. So, like, you could be right about your woman partner too, and she had an abusive father, and she had this, and she had that. All of that diagnostic stuff might be right on the money. However, in the distance you're experiencing right now with her, you won't get very far with that. You'll get much farther if you say, "What am I missing?"
Yeah, it's like it doesn't get you like the. So what I hear you saying is like the assumption doesn't get you the result that you
No,
want.
that's
It's
exactly
the
right.
reason. Like in my coaching,
Yeah,
I say, when the results matter more than the reasons. But we
yeah,
spend a lot of time with the reasons, which are the
yeah,
assumptions. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
Okay. So then, is there anything else you want to say about assumptions?
About assumptions, I think that you're born in a culture, if you want to really pursue it, and you need to, when you're looking at your own assumptions, don't be afraid to go all the way to the rock bottom of your assumptions. What did your mother assume about life? What did your father assume about life, and what did they teach you? So
Mm.
my mother taught, if there's going to be a bad day, it's going to be soon.
Yeah, like was that Marshall Goldsmith said, "What got you here won't get you there." So
Yeah.
you're living off your past and everything you've learned. There's no inquiry there. There's no
Yes. Yes.
curiosity. There's no
Right.
uh
Right.
just being curious. So that let's talk about curiosity. The first step that you have in your process, CAPS, the C stands for curiosity.
Well, I'll tell you an example that's very fond to me is a couple that came years ago, and he said, "You know how women are." He's very smart, an attorney, very, very articulate. "You know what how women are, Stephen?" I said, "No, I really don't." He said, "Well, I'll tell you how women are." He said, "They get married, they have children. As soon as they have children, they lose all interest in sex because that's the way the woman is set up. She wants to have children, she wants to have a nest." And he went on and on and on, very articulate. He could have written a book about it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I'm listening to him. And then the next week, for early in the week, I saw his wife he was splitting from. And I said, "Barbara, uh, tell me a little bit about you." And she started talking. I said, "May I ask you, do you like sex?" "Why'd you ask me that?" I said, "Well, I just want to know. I don't mean to be intrusive or rude, but I'm working here." And she says, "Yeah." She laughs. She says, "Yes, as a matter of fact, I do like sex. So let's call him Bob." I said, "Do you like Bob?" "Oh, yeah, I like him a lot, but he's hard to live with." "And do you like his body?" "Oh, he's got a good body. He's very fit." "So do you like it when you two make love?" "Well, not the way he makes love. He comes home after a long day and grabs my ass and say, 'Hey, babe, let's go.' I find it insulting. I'm not 17 anymore."
Yeah.
So his assumptions and his theory in the book that he might have written about women uh, didn't fly. And if he could get a hold of how far off he was in his theory, he might have a chance to listen to who he was with and learn from her what she was really feeling about, because she wanted to make love to him and she wanted to be with him, but she didn't want her ass grabbed and she didn't want to be treated like she was a late teenager. And not that she was without fault, she had plenty and she knew it and she talked about it. But I'm just saying that's a good indicator into assumptions to curiosity, because if he went to curiosity, he'd say, there's a poem by Anna Akhmatova where the guy says, "Tell me how they kiss you, tell me how you kiss." He might have said, "I don't have a clue about making love to you, honey.
Yeah.
What is it for you?" That would be curiosity.
I love that. Well, I don't know that it gives you the answer. It sure gives you a better chance at the answer. That's kind of how I look at it. And I like what you wrote here about curiosity is that, it's an antidote to, it's an antidote to blame, shame, diagnosis, criticism, and judgment. And you look at that. Like, so if I'm, and I talk about that in my work, and like that, judgment, blame, and complaint. Those are the antithesis of curiosity, the complete opposite, right? So, but curiosity then is a resolution to those. If I'm blaming, like, let me be curious about where that's coming from. If I'm shaming, like, where's that coming from? So
Yeah.
it allows you to explore. And I think
Yeah.
you said that. And then the other thing is, you said the curiosity is about having a genuine interest in the person that sits across from you. And
Yes.
that's a really good thing. And that's applicable in life, in every aspect of life. And that's what I love about this. When we talk about marriage, and I spent a lot of time doing a lot of divorce coaching. And one of the things I was effective at divorce coaching because I was effective at business coaching. I was
Yes.
effective at
Yes.
business. I was effective at sales. And I saw how things were so similar. So when I read a book or an article, or I talk to somebody about divorce, you could see the similarities, just like you have here in your CAP system, where you make assumptions, and curiosity is the antidote to some of those assumptions, which would be the blame, the shame, the criticism, and all that. Um, and then you go on a little bit further, and you talk about how some people can't, or they don't trust their partner. And I think that's a really, really important part of exploring curiosity. um, let's talk about that for a second.
Well, I would link it to what you and I do. To the people who are listening to this podcast, it's obvious that Martine has a lot to say and has a lot of experience. Everybody can see that. I trust that.
Yeah.
It's obvious that I have a lot to say and have a lot of experience, and he trusts that. Now, how easy is it for us to mastermind together in front of you and be respectful of each other? Because he may see things one way, he in fact does, and he's to say, "Stop, Stephen. That's a good thing for me." But I can say, "Stop, Martine. I don't see it that way," and we can start like exploring a little further.
Yeah.
That's curiosity. Well, how is it that Martine sees this differently? Doesn't he know that I created this thing and I know everything? No, it's not like that. It's like we get a little curious with each other and say, he says, "Wow, Stephen's onto something." Or I say, "Wow, Martine's onto something." So you got to get that quality. You have to invite that quality into your relationships. This customer knows something that you don't.
Yeah.
And if you have the context, he'll tell you, or she'll tell you. She'll tell you what's wrong with your business if you have the ability to listen. But every one of us has been in business situations where the business owner or the person doesn't listen at all. Not
Absolutely. And I'm reading the book, and I'm gonna paraphrase what you're saying here, because I want to shift and address what you just said. So the sentence you wrote was, curiosity looks like serious interest in your partner's point of view. And then I wrote my own notes, and I said, what are they curious about? And because I'm always writing my own notes. I got your book. I got it all marked up. I got it underlined, and then I write my notes on it. What I think it means and how I'm going to interpret that. And so I'm thinking, like, somebody comes in, a client comes in, or a spouse comes in, or a child comes in, or a friend comes in. They show up, and show up to you, and they're upset, and you're like, okay, well, what's curious about that? Like, well, they're saying things that are not nice to me. Maybe they're judging me, maybe they're blaming me, blaming, they're complaining. And I just thought about this when you were talking about curiosity. I can look at how they're communicating, as though they have a point of view, and they're working out their point of view. And how they're working it out is to judge. How they're working it out is to yell. How they're working it out is to talk in a way that I don't like, but that is their best way to work it out. And I saw that in my divorce, and I saw that with my kids, and I saw that with my clients. That like, I make mistakes in business, right? So clients will get upset, and it's like, I can get upset and try to defend myself, where I'm not being curious, where I know better than you. So I'm going to tell you how the cow ate the cabbage, right? I could do that with my wife. I could do that with people, and I'm good at that. But like
yes.
you said, it doesn't get, I think you said this at the very beginning. It doesn't get us anywhere. There's no cheese down that tunnel.
Well, yeah, and there's another factor. We're going to do a podcast in the coming weeks on communication, the art of 3+3. And we'll explain that to you. But it fits if this what Martine is saying, because you may see that person as judgmental or whatever they're doing because they don't quite know how to communicate. But if they get into some communication competencies, they can change how they talk about, I don't know what I'm doing here. I can say to a customer, and I have, I'm a coach. I'm a relationship coach. So if a couple comes to me and they're saying this and that and the other thing, I can say this. I don't really understand what you're telling me. What? Well, I thought you were a doctor. Yeah, I'm all of those things, but I don't understand what you're saying. Would you say that to me again in a different way? And they do. And then I say, again, I want it again. You know, my ears are old and I'm older and you're younger. I'd like to make sure I really get what you're saying. Would you give it to me a different way? If we do that, I call that attentiveness to the thing that's going on between us, so that I'm giving them all the permission I'm able to play with the idea themselves and see if they can get clearer on what they're trying to say. That's curiosity plus attentiveness.
Oh, absolutely. That's really great. As a matter of fact, after this podcast, I have a coaching call, and it's from a gentleman that I've been coaching for a couple of years, and he's at a crossroads. Wants to make a decision, and he's asking me to help him make that decision. And it was really interesting because I was completely clueless this morning when we started our conversation. I said, "Listen, I gotta jump off the call with you, and I got a couple more things I got to do so I can jump on with you after after I do my podcast." And he says, "Do you have any idea what you're gonna, any idea, anything I can work on?" And I said, "Joe, I'm clueless. I have no idea." And I said, "That's what's good.
Yes,
That's the good part is I have
that's
no
right.
idea."
That's
Because
right.
now I really want to explore what's going on with you.
Yes,
That's that assumption. That would have been that assumption that you talk about down here, the assumption that doesn't have curiosity.
right,
But
right.
identifying the assumption, now I have a choice to be curious. Well, I'm curious. Like, wow, I don't know. And how powerful that could be in relationships. Like you
Oh,
said here,
absolutely. Yes,
curiosity, and this is right before you go into the next section. She said curiosity is also an effective tonic for power struggles, and I think that kind of says it all. It's really good. It's a great tonic for power struggles.
it is. There's
So,
no doubt.
yeah.
Because there was a guy in the bank, my bank, Chase Bank, and he just came from the 24 Fitness, and he had a wife beater T-shirt on, and he's talking big and masculine and loud on his phone. I'm about 4 people in front of him by the teller, and I can't hear what she's saying because he's so boisterous and loud. And I turned around and looked at him, and the second time I turned around and looked, he said, "You got a problem with me?" And I stopped, and thank God I had a minute of consciousness. I walked back to him and I said, "Well, you've got a very strong voice, and it's very loud, and I think it's beautiful. I think your voice is beautiful, but I can't hear the teller because I'm older and my ears aren't as good." And I talked with him for a few minutes, and I watched him. It was as if his size came down like this, like an air
Yeah.
was coming out. And
Yeah.
then he talked to me for a few minutes. He hung. I said, "I'm sorry." I hung up. And when he walked out of the bank, he waved to me. So I
Yeah.
didn't enter his power structure. I instead stayed with a question. Yeah, I don't hear well, and I'm wondering if there's some way I can address this.
Yeah.
Not about bad you, good me, just about can we address. I think if we get that in the culture, we'll have a lot less useless conflict and a lot more meaningful dialogue between people who are passionate, people who are busy, people who are rushed, who sure of themselves, they built themselves up by their own. All kinds of things have come in that make them that way. And those people tend not to be very curious because they're focused on what they've done, not what they're not.
I
But
love it.
if you can turn it towards attentiveness with curiosity, then you've got an opening.
Perfect. Awesome. Awesome. Okay, cool. Let's go to the next one. There's so much that we can talk about. So the next one is attentiveness. And then let me kind of jump in real quick right here. You wrote something, you said something, and try instead, and I actually kind of rewrote it. Instead of trying to win, ask and
Yeah.
have the discipline of attentiveness. Or
Now, if you've raised a child, if you've had a child, you have, I have, I've had lots and lots of children.
had a couple, yeah.
One of the things you notice if you're aware and if you're alert is when the child is in a crisis. They fell on the sidewalk and cut both of their knees and broke a tooth. And they're in a crisis, they're in the living room bleeding and crying. What they do not need, the last thing they need is your instruction. What they do need is for you to say, wow, you really hurt that knee, didn't you? Show me where it hurts the worst. If you get genuinely curious, you'll see them go, they'll lighten up. They can fix the bruised knees or the broken tooth. They can fix it. But they can't fix a parent who's locked into being the answer man and knows everything and wants to be the teacher and so forth. So there's that. What kind of attentiveness are you showing? Are you
Yeah,
showing attentiveness out of your heart, or are you showing attentiveness out of your agenda? That's
yeah,
one.
and you talk a little bit about attentiveness in your book, and it kind of it is almost like you can use it as a weapon and to gaslight. Like I have your attention, but I can gaslight you with that. And you don't say that word, but you say something that you said something that made me think about that. You said, "I'm curious." You had a story there. I don't need to go too much into that, but
Yeah,
it made me think about that. Like once I gain the attention of somebody, I have the opportunity to manipulate that attention. It's up to me to have integrity and to know where I'm going. And I think that's the thing that we as children and as adults as well, where we've been hurt because we've given our trust, we've given our attention to somebody, and it hasn't come back in a way that we felt good about, or we didn't get
yeah.
the result that we would have hoped to have gotten. And like that whole gaslighting thing, where that I a lot of people talk about.
Well, you could take what Martinez just said. We have a kind of a tricky little thing happening here. That is, the next one is presence. And you've got to get smarter about presence, which relates to your attentiveness, because you may believe after 40 years or 30 years or whatever years, you may think that you understand a situation, and the most helpful thing you can say is, I do not know what this means. I do not know what's going on. Start at ground zero.
Yeah, you so pre that's pre so presence. So say that a different way, if you don't mind.
Uh,
I like what you said,
well,
and yeah,
if I'm not present, I'm problem solving. I'm superior.
yeah.
I'm I'm optimistically cheerleading people on.
Loaded. I
I
got a loaded answer. I got a response
Yeah.
in waiting. Yeah, I got that. Okay.
And so if I'm present, I feel kind of like I'm not bringing much to the conversation because I'm not. But if I'm present with you and I care about you, I'm doing a lot of, say that again, Martine. Wow. What's that? Would you tell me more? I'm in that frame, not in
Yeah.
the frame of, why didn't you call that client in the afternoon? Why did you do that? Why don't you say this? We're all tempted. High performing men are tempted to have a lot of answers, a lot of cliches. And that's what has to be let go of to be present in the moment.
You know what? And so this next part is way too important to like not discuss with regard to presence. Is you said this. I'm going to read this. You said believing in your own presence is born of believing in your own legitimacy. Not something you've talked about. That's something you've told me when you and I have worked in a session or something.
Yeah.
It's that legitimacy, and it was like, talk about that. Let's talk about that single word of legitimacy for a second, and then let's expand on that, how it goes into presence and maybe it moves into persistence.
My son Andrew was 3 years old, and I was living in a new house, and I was hanging the stereo speakers all through the family room. It was a nice house. And I had Bob Dylan, if those of you who can lived that long remember him. I was a big fan of Bob Dylan, and I had Bob Dylan cranked up, and I'm on the ladder, and I'm hanging speakers, and Andrew comes out of his room, 3 years old, stark naked. And he says, I look at him, I say, hi, Andrew. He says, I can't have that music. I said, what? He said, I can't have that music. 3 years old. I said, Andrew, I'm listening to Bob Dylan. Leave me alone. Will you go back to your room? He says, I can't have that music. I got down off the ladder. Thank God I could listen. I got down off the ladder. I said, what's going on? I can't have that music. He wouldn't give an explanation other than that. And I thank God I was that moment able to sit on the floor. I said, you don't like this music? He said, I can't have that music. And I went in, I turned Bob Dylan off and turned something on, Chopin or something. And he said, I can have that music. Mm. That happened to me on a Saturday morning in Burbank when he was 3. Now, what I learned is he had his right to say what he likes and doesn't like. He had a father he believed in that wasn't going to talk him out of it or wasn't going to shame or blame him, wasn't going to power out of it or something, shut up and go to your room. What he had was a father he believed in, so he stayed with, I can't have that music. Legitimacy is a birthright. You're given it at birth, and the baby knows when he's hungry, he cries or she cries, knows when their pants are wet, dirty or whatever, knows and yells about that, knows when they're sleepy, laughs spontaneously. You don't have to make them laugh like a lot of parents think. The child will laugh at what's funny to them. So they're born with that sense of legitimacy, and that's what gets taken away by the culture in little micro moves, by the parents, by the school teachers, by the church or synagogue, by the business world. A lot of people will take away that sense that you have a right to your thoughts and feelings and your experiences, and that's why Stafford would say no blame, no shame to his poetry students. He'd say, I don't shame them and I don't blame them.
You know, and it's an interesting world that we're living in right now, because when I look at the evolution of where we've gone, and let's just take the last probably like 100 years or so since the 1920s to the present, we've had so many different movements. We've had, the women's rights. We've had, the minority rights, and I would say that across, not just blacks, but it's Hispanics and everybody, Asians and all that. So it's a lot of different changes, and a lot of people have supported those. I'd say the majority of people are supporting this. But what happens is lately, I think probably in the last few years, 10 years maybe, or 20 years, is that a one voice is demanding to be legitimate. And just like your scenario where you're talking about Andrew was, you legitimized him. And sometimes we feel like we are not legitimizing ourselves.
Exactly.
Like I'm giving up. I just gave up my Bob Dylan. That's my Christmas thing. I'm always, every time I put up Christmas lights or every time I'm putting up something, it's my guy. I gotta listen to him. So we give up something, and life is a balance of all that. It doesn't mean that you sway one way to people that are woke, and it's like I'm going to listen to that all day because they're woke. It's that there's a responsibility over there that they could take. It's their choice, not my choice. It's the person that's their choice. And also, I have legitimacy in myself to choose how I want to communicate and deal with the consequences of the result of my communication, how I affect my own personality and my own self-esteem, because sometimes I could give up too much. And there's a lot of men that I talk to that I always give up. Women as well. I gave up a lot in my relationship and they lost themselves. And so when they're claiming their legitimacy, like I think this is what you're saying, claiming that legitimacy, I am legitimate. I'm it's okay for me to feel this way. It's okay for me to say this. There's a battle between that, because oftentimes a person that is not used to you being a powerful human being is they're like often offended, like, well, that's not how you used to talk to me, and now you're talking to me to this new way, and I see you legitimizing yourself, but you're stepping on me. And so people take it in a way that it's not meant, but they still take it that way.
Yes. In the 70s, you're not old enough to remember this, but I am, because I was already an adult. There was a thing called transactional analysis And what transactional analysis, you've heard the phrase, I'm okay, you're okay.
I remember,
What,
yeah,
what they did a good job of is talking, that's legitimacy.
yeah,
It's not like I'm okay, you're not, or you're okay, I'm not. But they worked to have that transaction verbal between two people. It's not about one of us not being okay. It's that we're both okay. But now, how are we differing and what do we need to do? The communication, 3 plus 3. What do we need to do to address that so we can get
yeah.
closer, not farther apart?
Yes. How do we
Starting
balance?
with the fact that we're both okay.
Yeah, yeah. How do we balance conflict? Because we're going to have conflict. I loved spending the time with you and Lynn. It was, and I love the way you guys communicate because you guys have, in my opinion, me observing you and your wife is you have an agreement to conflict. You have an agreement, like, yeah,
Yes.
we are going to have conflict. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you have and then you also have an agreement how you're going to that you're going to get out of it. That you're not going to stay there. That's my
Right.
assumption.
Yes. Yeah. It's a
Yeah,
good assumption.
beautiful.
It
Yeah.
says it well. And
So
we've worked hard to articulate that. Now, the next one after presence is persistence. And I don't think that deserves as much time as the one following, which is genuineness
okay.
or sincerity. But persistence is something we all know in our gut because when you're doing inner work, which is what we're talking about, getting in tune, in touch with yourself at the deepest level and at the truest level, it's easy to give up. I wrote a text to a client who went off on a 1 week fishing trip at a really intense time of his work with me. And I wrote him a text and I said, remember, inner work takes no vacation. So you just say that to yourself that persistence is about inner work, not taking a vacation. Inner work goes on day and night, 24/7. And that's tied into why you would write down your dreams. That's tied in why you would journal about your relationships. That's tied into why you would hire Martine to be a coach to you in your own mental breakthrough stuff, or me to be a coach. That's why you would do that. So you have an ally in this very sensitive and demanding work called
Yeah.
inner work to become more fully who you are and more effective about who you are and
Absolutely.
more
And the
powerful.
way I read it is my the skill that I need in order to stay the course. That's how I read that. You
Yeah.
know, when I was looking at it and I looked at when I was looking at this, I was looking at persistence and it was like, okay, out of presence, persistence is my ability to stay the course. How do I stay the course? How do I, and that is with coaching. You know, for me, I work with you, Dr. Frueh, every other week, and that allows me to work through the stuff that I'm already committed to working through. Like
Yes.
and I look at it this way, like I'm gonna get through my life and I'm gonna work through things. I know that. And
Yes.
there's things and new things are gonna pop up. It's having, like you said, an ally, somebody that's going to be there with you as you stay the course to coach you, to give you, to help you, to help inspire you, to help keep you inspired, to help to keep that understands you a little better sometimes than you understand yourself when you've gone off
Exactly.
course.
Exactly. Exactly.
And I think that's how I look at that. So that persistence was real powerful when I saw that there. So let's jump to the next part. Do you want to say anything more about that, or you want to
Well,
jump
I
to the
just
next?
want to say from the if you don't know who Seth Godin is,
Seth
Godin,
Godin, yeah, yeah.
he has a daily little sentence or two, very worth it to get on his mailing list. Seth Godin. He wrote a book called The Practice, and I pulled a couple of phrases from the book for some of the men I'm seeing. And
Oh
the
yeah.
top one I pulled was attitudes are skills. So
Mhm.
that's just something to leave with yourself because it's not doesn't come down from heaven. It's something you develop, the attitude to be persistent, the
Yeah,
attitude to be curious,
yeah,
the attitude to be attentive.
yeah.
Those things are skills. They're skill development. So if you can look at it that way, then the next one we'll talk about is genuineness. Genuineness becomes a skill, but it starts out as a belief. And
All right, we got sincerity, which is genuineness to you, right? You
yes, yes,
okay?
because I think sincerity isn't nearly as powerful a word as genuineness. And genuineness means that you are who you are, who you are. If I asked everybody listening to this podcast, tell me the most genuine person you've known in your life, a name will pop up on almost everybody's head. They'll say, huh, Well, my friend Bob, I didn't like him very much, but boy, oh boy, you could take him to the bank. He was exactly who he. My friend Mary, she was in trouble all the time in school, but she was Mary all the time. She was Mary. So you know this, and you know it in the
Yeah.
family when you're lying to your brother, your sister, your mother, your father, when you're lying and trying to be somebody that you're not,
Mm,
a better
brilliant.
Christian, a better worker or something. Whatever you're
Yeah.
trying to be, that's not genuine, man. That's performative. And we say, get rid of performative, flush it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting take. I think you get a lot of pushback on that one. I think you would get a lot of pushback on that one because, from my experiences, that when, if I was to say that to somebody, and I've kind of said something like that to people, and you said Christian. So let's say somebody that's religious, and you say,
Yes, that's a
you
better
know,
way to say it. Yeah.
yeah, let's say that one. I get myself in trouble here, but and I'm always in trouble. But the thing is that there's pushback on that, and I really want to let's unpack that for just a moment here. So I'm saying no, no, that my religion. That's an authentic expression of me. And what would you say to that, or how would you unpack that in
Well,
this distinction?
I would unpack it by talking about my own experience. I have a doctor of divinity. I studied religion for 8 years. That doesn't make me a guru. I'm saying I learned a lot from the inside out. I learned
Yeah,
how a lot of things work. So I say, the best teacher in Christianity was named Jesus Christ. He was a wonderful teacher. And if you take him out of how I ought to behave, how I ought to be, and just listen to his words, he had wonderful words, wonderful, clear, psychologically true words. He says, if you can't see the speck in your own eye, you focus on the beam in your brother's eye, you're in trouble, pal. He says, who do you say I am? And people would answer that. Not, he wouldn't say, I am. He would say, who do you think? What do you see? What do you believe? How do you go? He was authenticating their experience with him. So I'm not preaching that. I'm not saying I know better than other people. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm saying he's a mentor of mine. He's a lot of other things. If those of you who want to say he's more than that, he's a son of
hmm
God. I
we're
get
not
all
taking
that.
that from you. Yeah, we just
Right.
want to.
I'm just saying he's a mentor. And if I see him as a mentor, I can read about him and be open to how he's guiding me in this conversation.
Yeah. So I look at okay, great. Thank you for unpacking that way. So now I can see it differently. So how I would look at that is what are the values and what are the virtues that I want to follow that resonate for me. So
Yeah.
let's say I open up, I open up a Bible, right? And I start reading it. And it's like, wow, that sure resonates for me. That resonates for me. Like that resonates for me. And yeah, I would like and I'm making the choice to consciously live my life according to those values and those virtues, the experiences that I'd like to have. That's cool. I can see that as more authentic and more genuine than following what somebody says and then going, well, I got to try to fit myself in that box because that guy said that. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
add that Jesus taught by telling stories more often than not. He not so often was didactic. He wasn't a college professor.
Yeah.
He didn't speak from the academic point of view or even the religious establishment point of view. He spoke from his heart. And so he told stories. Well, it was like a guy sowing seeds. Well, the woman at the well story, beautiful story. The
Yeah.
man laying on his stretcher in front of the healing pond who couldn't get there. There's a lot of stories where he upsets the apple cart by saying, I'm not going to tell you the usual stuff that gets poured on you, but I'm going to ask you some questions. The man laying in the stretcher by the healing pool, he says, do you really want to get healed? That's what he said. So he didn't make it into a sermon. He asked the guy a question because he wasn't getting into the healing pond. The healing pond was activated once a week or once a month, whatever. He wasn't getting there. He was complaining and whining to Jesus. And Jesus said, do you really want to get healed? Now, that for me is more meaningful than somebody saying, well, if he had asked his brothers to pick him up and carry to the pool or whatever, somebody with a solution isn't nearly as close to genuineness as what Jesus was doing with him. Because you can imagine, this guy didn't even know it was Jesus, by the way. There's nothing that said, he didn't.
yeah,
He's
yeah.
a scraggly looking guy walking by, and he says, somebody help me. And Jesus turns around and says, do you really want to get healed? I like that question for myself. Do you want to get better?
Yeah.
You know, don't ask
Yeah.
yourself if you're going to get this or that. Ask yourself, hey, Martine, do you want to get better? Do you want to do this with your child or your honey or with your work or whatever? And if you do, then what answers come up for you in your curiosity and attentiveness, and what persistence and presence, and in the genuineness of the man that you are? What comes up most powerfully for you? That's what I would say.
I love that. Thank you. That was really cool. Thanks for unpacking that with me.
Yeah,
And then so the final place that you will find yourself from assumptions, if you notice that the two men are separated, the two people are separated, they go through curiosity, attentiveness, presence. You got the arrow that goes up, persistence, sincerity or genuineness, and your end result is connection. Because it seems like to me that the end result that human beings are searching for is human connection.
I think so. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about a little bit about that. Can you give a quick synopsis of this whole path, if you wouldn't mind?
When
Walk us through
when
again.
when I say Lynn, we've been together 40 years, married 35. When I say, Lynn, I really love you, she looks at me sometimes and she'll say, do you? And then she'll say, I know you do. So we've just communicated hundreds of hours of conversation in a few words.
Yeah.
Because I'm saying, I really love you. What do I need most? I don't need her to say, I love you too. I need her to receive that. And we're gonna get into that with the 3+3 in communications.
Yeah.
I need her to receive what I just said. I'm feeling it, I'm thinking it, I'm imagining it, and I'm giving it, and I'm saying, I really love you, Lynn. Now all she can do with that is shut the door or receive it.
That's
And
so cool. It's so funny. I said something, this is about a month ago, to somebody, and they said, like, I love you or so. Oh, yeah, no, what they said God bless you.
yeah,
And then I looked at him, I go, I accept. And they
yeah,
start
there you
and
go.
she started to cry.
Yes,
She said no one's ever accepted that. Like they always push me back, like, oh, I accept that. I was
that's
like, and
beautiful.
I didn't, that's kind of like what you're saying. I just kind of made that up on the spot.
Right.
So yeah.
Because that's your genuineness. That you didn't make it up on the spot. That's the word there is flowing.
Yeah.
When you're in genuineness, you're flowing. You're not trying. You're not performing.
That was really cool. Somebody said that. Like
Yeah.
somebody said that to me, said, God bless you. And I just said, yeah, that's cool. Like I just like my whole brain said, yeah, that's a cool thing. Like,
Yes.
why would I like, okay, I accept that, like, yeah,
Right.
bring it on. You got
Right.
something to say about that? You're gonna bring, yeah, help me out. It's gonna send a blessing. I'll take it. And
Yes.
that was like you said, that was a genuine thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Wow. What a great well, first off, what a great book you have, and I'll put a link in the notes how you get this book. The book is From Marginal to Magnificent: How to Make Your Marriage Sing, by Dr. Stephen W Frueh, who's this guy right here. And so we may unpack a little bit more of it. We may unpack other things, but if you're listening to this podcast, our vlog, as they say, and you have something you want us to address. Now,
Yeah.
the name of the podcast is Men's Breakthrough. Our focus is men. That's our focus. It doesn't mean that we don't address the things that women are, that's just our focus. And that's my focus as a coach. I do coach women, and Dr. Frueh coaches both couples and all that, and counsels them. And but if you have a question, if you have a concern, please, by all means, let us know. Comment below, reach out to us. Our Dr. Frueh's numbers right there. Best way to get a hold of him is to text him. But in the comments, I have his website. He's got a couple different websites. His stuff is amazing. Um, is there anything else you want to? Anything else you want to kind of
I,
plug
I
yourself
I
about?
think we're good. You know what I would like? I would like
Yeah.
feedback on what would be the perfect amount of time that Martina and I spend for you, the listener. What would you like the ideal podcast would be? How long? 10
Yeah.
minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 50 minutes? What would it be? Just give us that feedback if you would, because
Yeah.
that'll
It's
help
great
us
feedback.
kind of developing it.
And then right
We
behind
could
you, you
talk
have
all
a
afternoon.
handout.
What's
Sorry.
that?
Yeah, we can talk. Yeah, you and I just we can talk forever. And we just basically what this podcast is Dr. Frueh and I were talking and we're like, why don't we just record this and because this is what we talk about. This is how we communicate.
Right.
Right behind you, there's a handout. That handout is what we covered today, which is the CAPS presentation. I'll show it to you right now. Let me see if I can show you this. It looks like I think this is it. This is what the handout looks like. This is the handout. If you want a copy of this handout that just walks us through the curiosity and the whole thing, by all means, and it also has our information. So if you want to work with Dr. Frueh, I highly recommend it. I work with Dr. Frueh, great guy to work with. And so I'm blessed to do that. So there's his information right here, how to get a hold of him, how to email him, all that's right there. If you want to work with me, I love working with people. I've got a room for another 2 or 3 clients. There's my information right there under my picture. This is called Men's Breakthrough Hangout. We are grateful that you guys have spent the last 51, 52 minutes with us. Any closing comments there, Dr. Frueh?
No, I'm good. God bless you all. And look forward to seeing you in what, 2 weeks?
In a couple of
4
weeks.
weeks?
We'll see you soon. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks a lot.